Let's talk about contracts for a minute. What is a contract doing? A contract is providing for the allocation of risks, the distribution of risks between the buyer and the seller. That's what a contract does. Any contract is regulating the distribution of risks between the parties to that contract. And the contracts can shift the burdens of risks between the parties. Now, the parties can contract with regard to any risk, even those risks that they have no control over, whether they're absurd or improbable or simply no one thought of. So, for instance, with the Suez Canal case, the parties could have contracted with regard to that risk, even though neither one had any control over the opening or closing of the Suez Canal. In fact, the parties can even contract regarding termination of a contract without performance, to provide for the ability of the parties to simply move on without actually performing, without shipping the goods, or without payment for the goods. A contracting system must do three things. First of all, a contracting system has to provide the requirements of a valid contract. Make sure you know these three things, by the way, because we're going to be talking about them a lot for the rest of the semester. So the first thing a contracting system must do is to tell us what is a valid contract. And a contract is generally what we call an enforceable promise. There's a promise. I promise to do something. I promise to purchase a car. I promise to build a house. And that promise is usually given in exchange for another promise, primarily being, I promise to pay for the goods. A contracting system will establish what kind of promises that society will enforce. For instance, in the United States, courts won't enforce every promise, only promises that meet certain conditions. If I promise to give everyone in the class $5 at the end of the semester, and I say, I promise you $5. Email me at the end of the semester and send me a request for $5. I promise to pay you. That sounds like a promise, right? But a court will not enforce that promise. Why? Because our contracting system requires you to do something in exchange for that promise. There must be something of value given by you to me. If I said instead, I promise to give you $5 if everyone in the class makes an A, well, if you give up the right to not make an A, then you've given me something in exchange. So we don't enforce every contract. We only enforce certain contracts. And that's what our contracting system does. Now, the second thing that a contracting system does is it must provide guidance for the performance of a contract. Meaning the parties to a contract have to know what are their obligations under the contract. The parties must know what the obligations are so that they know when performance is complete, when their obligations end, when they have finalized their contract performance. In the law, a failure to keep a promise is known as a breach. So whenever you hear this term, and we'll be talking about this term a lot for the rest of the course, a breach of contract means a failure to do what you were obligated to do by the contract. The third thing that a contracting system must do is to provide remedies for the breach of a contract. The contracting system must provide for a remedy in the event one of the parties does not keep their promise. It's this remedy that gives meaning to the contract. If we were simply to exchange promises without a remedy, then it would not matter if I kept my promise or not. The promise becomes meaningless unless there is a remedy, unless there's a way of ensuring compliance with the contract. And remedies can take different forms. Well, payment of damages, monetary damages. That's the most common way of resolving a breach of contract. One party has to pay damages to the other party. It could be performance of obligations. We contract, you're going to promise to sell me a piece of property. You breach that promise. I can go to a court and say, look, court, you must force this person to sell me this piece of property. Performance of obligations. We can even combine remedies. If there are some remedies available, some are not, we can combine remedies so as to make a party whole. So a contracting system must provide remedies. It's this remedy that gives the contract meaning.